Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas, on Thursday, April 13th. And we're going to be talking today with our good friend Fausta Rodriguez Wertz. She's the editor of Fausta's blog. We're going to be talking about the latest in Latin America. There's a lot on the agenda today. We're going to be talking about Venezuela. We'll be talking about Argentina, where there's another indictment against ex-President Cristina Fernandez. We'll talk about Brazil, where every politician seems to be on their investigation. We'll do one more chat about Ecuador and the elections there. In Mexico, Kate del Castillo is back in the news. She's got a television series, which I think you're going to find very interesting. She plays a first lady. Isn't that an interesting story? Fausta is going to share with us her new blog post, very interesting, about Mexico and about Putin. Well, we begin with a couple of administrative things. Number one, let me say hello to everyone at Babalu who's listening to us over there. Thank you for your support. Thank you for always telling you how much you like the show. Another quick thing is that our show is now on YouTube, and the audio, that is on YouTube. And one of the nice things I like about YouTube is that we can break up the show into a couple of parts, and that makes it easier for those of you who may not be able to listen to the whole 45 minutes or whatever. You'll have a chance to listen to part one and then come back and listen to part two. I like that a lot because I know that sometimes it's difficult to listen to the podcast when it's 40 minutes or 45 minutes long, but over at YouTube, we break it up into a couple of parts, and that's a really cool thing. We just started. This is our first week. We've already posted some of our shows. Eventually, our goal is to not just do the audio, but eventually maybe even do a video component to it. But that's probably a little bit further down the road. I wouldn't expect that to happen anytime soon. It's coming. It's in our plans, but that's going to be a little bit down the road. Before we get to Fausta, a couple of quick things on this day in history. It was on this day in 1743 that Thomas Jefferson was born, so we remember that. And it was on this day in 1970. That's not long ago, but it sure feels like it's a long time ago. But on this day in 1970, Apollo 13 in Houston, we have a problem. It was on this day, April 13th, 1970. Hello, Fausta. How are you?
Very well, Silvio. We'll see how the podcast sounds. There's a lot of very loud noise outdoors, so I hope it doesn't show through the podcast.
Well, we just heard that we dropped this big non-nuclear bomb in Afghanistan, so maybe, I don't know, there may be a few more going off this hour, so maybe that's what we're going to hear, a little bit of that as well. There is a lot to get into today, Fausta. Would you say that it's been a pretty busy week in Latin America, or would you say this is pretty normal?
No, actually, it's been quite interesting. Some weeks one has very little different to talk about, but this is actually pretty good.
Yeah. There's a lot to get into.
Certainly.
Yeah, there have been a lot of events, and you've been covering them on Fausta's blog, and we appreciate that so much. Why don't we begin with your blog post about Mexico? I found that very interesting. You told us about Kate del Castillo. You told us about Mexico and Putin. And then there's Mr. Krause, as they used to call him. And as I remember, they would call him in Mexico Mr. Krause. That's how they would refer to him, Mr. Krause. But tell us about your post and some of the points you made in that post, Fausta.
Well, Mexico is apparently getting ready to blame Putin for not winning the elections. Remember AMLO, Obrador, who for years was saying he was the legitimate president of Mexico even when he lost the elections?
Right,
now a guy
yes.
from the party named Rios Peter is saying that Mexico is a natural target for Russia because the country is expected to become a top 5 economy over the next half century. And if Russia intervened in the United States election, there's every reason to think that Mexico is a target for attack, even when, first of all, there's no evidence either way on either country. So it seems to me that Mexico is not looking for a target to lay more blame on someone other than the United States, which they have been doing for about 107 years at this point, at least since Texas declared independence from Mexico. Enrique Krause had an article in the New York Times saying that the aggression against Mexico and the plundering of its territory, it's one of the United States American original sins. The other two are slavery and racism. And because of this aggression against Mexico, Enrique Krause wants all Mexicans to be free to live in the United States without restrictions. He didn't say anything about the other way around, whether Americans should be going to Mexico. But there is a continuous, and I'm sure you saw this when you lived in Mexico, blaming on the U.S. everything that happens in Mexico. There's a series that Castillo, remember El Chapo's old friend who went to interview him with Sean. She has a new series, and the series is called Ingobernable, which means ungovernable. And I haven't seen the whole thing, but the couple of episodes that I've seen have implied that the CIA killed the president of Mexico when he was about to declare the end of the war on drugs after blaming the U.S. for every Mexican death on the war on drugs. Now, Ingobernable should be named unwatchable because it's that bad. But, I mean, it's typical Kate del Castillo. She did La Reina del Sur, and she plays this very spunky girl. In Ingobernable, she plays the first lady who supposedly comes from an upper-class family with a lot of money. And she wears, when she's playing the first lady, she's wearing expensive clothes, 7-inch heels, which she sleeps in, by the way. And then apparently her character had been kidnapped before, so she has all these street smarts, and she ends up hiding in the house of her nanny's son or something to that effect. It's a really convoluted plot, but everything in it is like it's like beyond belief. She's hiding. They can't find her. She's the most famous woman in the country. She walks around the city for hours. You know, it's like everything bad that you have seen on TV, only carried to a larger degree than you expect. So typical blame the U.S. propaganda, and Mexico has been doing this for a very long time. Back in the 60s, in the 70s, it was a cartoon, the comic book Los Agachados, and from then on, you know, it's not going to stop. So it's kind of interesting that then now they're willing to blame the Russians, if not Putin personally yet, but for pity's sake.
Right. Well, I mean, this is the series, you know, is I have not seen it. I laughed a lot when I saw your note about it or your post about it, because it's interesting that nobody blamed Fast and I don't know. I haven't seen the series, but I'm wondering if they're blaming Fast and Furious for the death of any Mexicans, which that was in fact did happen. You know, these guns from Fast and Furious have killed a lot of Mexican civilians. I wonder if they did that. But I just think Mexico, I get the impression, look at it from a distance, Mexico is a country that I've gotten to know quite well. And I think it looks to me like the political class in Mexico really feels overwhelmed, if you will, if I could put it that way, by events, that the events are really sort of getting out of control. You've got Pemex right now announcing that they may be running out of oil unless they start drilling for more. You have a very tense political situation in Mexico between the three parties. You've got elections coming up. President Peña Nieto, who at first did some interesting things, is extremely unpopular. So right now, the one thing I'll say about Kate del Castillo's series, Ingobernable, is probably what a lot of Mexicans are saying about their country. So in that respect, the title of her series, may in fact ring some truth to it. But I'll be enjoying it a little bit to see what Kate del Castillo looks like as a first lady who probably looks a lot like the current first lady of Mexico, who is also a very pretty lady who comes from television. But Fausta, I just think the country right now is going through a period where it is in fact Ingobernable, and I'm just you have to wonder. I don't want to get too crazy here, but you have to begin to wonder at what point will Mexicans start demanding more law and order, and so on and so on. So Ingobernable, Fausta, may just very well be the best way to describe Mexico. I'm a little disappointed with Mr. Krause for the article that he wrote. I had the opportunity not to meet personally his father, but I remember his father quite well, and he knew my late father-in-law quite well. They were good friends. And all I can tell you about his father, I don't think his father would have ever written anything like this. And if we're going to say that the original sins of the United States are racism and slavery and so on, well, I lived in Mexico for 4 years. There's a lot of racism in Mexico, believe me. And I do believe slavery was part of the native civilizations of Mexico. So I don't know. I think Mr. Krause, I don't know why he wrote this, but I'm disappointed that he did, Fausta. I really am. I think it's a bad piece. And I don't know what he thought he was accomplishing by writing that piece, but I don't think it brings anybody together if that's what he thought he was doing. Maybe it works inside Mexico, but I don't think it pushes the ball forward as far as advancing the illegal immigration in the United States, Fausta. So I was disappointed with his piece. I really was, Fausta.
Well, I have met Enrique Krause several times. I used to go to his lectures at Princeton University when he presented them with, he and Vargas Llosa used to have these public conversations, which were really very interesting. But that was in the days before Vargas Llosa took up with Julio Iglesias' first wife. And I'm going to be unkind, but the whole article struck me as agitprop propaganda for illegal immigration in the United States from Mexico, not from any other country. And I was very disappointed. I used to have a lot of respect for Enrique Krause's work. I also met his son, Leon, who's a very nice young man in his, I would say, late 30s, early 40s. And this was published in the New York Times, which is part owned by Carlos Slim, and it is totally without facts. I mean, the United States owes Mexico absolutely nothing. I put a commentary on my blog from another friend that put it on Facebook, and this friend knows a lot about Mexico. His family is one of the original families that settled in Texas before Texas was a state, and they decided to remain. So the fact remains, whatever Enrique Krause says or anybody who wants to blame Russia, the United States, or whoever for their country's problems, the fact remains, and I'm going to quote Tara McCormack, the Russia blame game is really an abdication of political responsibility. You can say that about the American blame game and any blame game at all. You are abdicating political responsibility over your country and blaming the United States for the war on drugs, the dead Mexicans, immigration, and so on. I mean, if the United States is such an evil place, then why force your poor people into it and condemn them essentially to a life of injustice? And that's the question that I couldn't answer by reading Enrique Krause's article. But you can count on it. I mean, Enrique Krause is lionized by intellectuals both in the United States and in Mexico. You can count on it that this article that Krause wrote is going to be quoted everywhere. All the leftists are going to be quoting it, and this is going to be used for a very long time for the cause of illegal immigration into the United States. I am. Right. I mean, it's beyond belief that he would lend himself to this. By the way, Enrique Krause got his start as a historian from, I believe, a Carnegie Fellowship back in the 1960s.
That's right. And let me correct myself. I misspoke. The article was written by, correct me because I misspoke, I think. The article was written by the father or the son? I misspoke.
The article was written by Enrique Krause, who is in his late 60s, early 70s.
Okay.
He is a Mexican historian, and he's being very well known for it. I met him when he was working at Princeton University. I don't know if he's still living in Princeton because I moved away from Princeton.
Okay.
His son, Leon, is in his, I would say, late 30s, lives in LA, and is an open borders advocate who wrote a book on interviewing poor people that had come to the United States illegally.
Right. No, I misspoke. It was, let me just, because I misspoke. The father, Enrique, was a good friend of my late father-in-law. They were, social friends in the Mexico City. They used to go to the same club, as they say, down there. And I remember my father-in-law would speak often about Mr. Krause, and I never met him personally, but I remember my father-in-law would speak very fondly of him, but not so much because of what he wrote about the United States, but what he wrote about internal politics in Mexico that used to please my late father-in-law a great deal, who was a huge critic of the Mexican political class. So I misspoke when I said the father and the son. I misspoke when I said that. I just wanted to correct the record. Fausta, before we take a break, let's just go very quickly to Ecuador, where they had the elections. I guess the elections are over, even though I keep seeing in Babalu and in your blog a lot of references to fraud. And is this thing over? I mean, can we pretty much write this off as a victory for the left, Fausta, and for Mr. Lenin Moreno, as they like to call him?
Lenin Moreno is the leftist candidate that Rafael Correa designated as his official successor. What happened during the election was that for the first couple of hours, the early results showed Lasso as the winner, the opposition candidate as the winner. Then, like it happened in Venezuela a few years ago, the election board's website went down for a couple of hours, and then, surprise, Moreno was declared the official winner. The election board was apparently closed to any observers from the OAS and other entities. Nobody knows what happened during the time that it went down. It was not a power outage or anything like that. But Ecuadorians are still demonstrating at night. They have been consistently demonstrating at night for since the election, essentially. I do not know what the result is going to be, but as far as the government is concerned, they're done. I mean, to the point that on election night, CNN in Espanol was saying that Lenin Moreno had won before I even said it, and it shows you that they were being fed the news from other sources than what was, in the media in the country.
As I recall, Fausta, what Mr. Lasso was banking on was a exit poll that showed him leading by 5 points. And then for many of us, speaking of Mexico and Mr. Krause, back in 1988, something similar happened in Mexico on election night, 1988, when the then Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, the candidate of the left, many people will tell you that he won the election, but then election night 1988, the computer broke down, la computadora, as they like to call it, broke down. And when it was all over, Mr. Salinas was elected president of Mexico with the extremely convenient popular vote of 50.3. He was elected president of Mexico with just slightly over a majority. And I'll never forget Mr. Krause writing an article about that my late father-in-law would share with me about how he thought Cuauhtemoc Cárdenas had in fact won the election, but the PRI used computer games to take it away from Cuauhtemoc Cárdenas and give it to Mr. Salinas, who of course eventually became a very controversial president himself. So I think for the time being, we have Lenín Moreno as the president of Mexico. Folks, we're going to take a little break. We'll come back with part 2 of our program today right after this.